Hello and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones. I pastor a church in Indianapolis, Indiana called Northwood Christian Church, hence the podcast's name. I'm recording this on the week leading up to the first Sunday in Advent. It's the day where we at Northwood and churches all over the globe light a candle of hope to suggest that we must keep the fire of hope alive and burning bright. And it also marks the 4-week march up to Christmas Day. But it's been hard lately to keep hope alive, what with the wars in the Ukraine and Israel-Palestine and the never-ceasing climate catastrophes, not to mention the violence and poverty in our own backyards, the whole while the rich getting richer as their greed forces the car off the road and into a potentially fiery crash, metaphorically speaking, regarding our planet. If all of this has you feeling overwhelmed, well, keep listening. Today's is a message of hope, and it could be just what you need. But before we get to all of that, I should first plug our church. I mentioned before, Northwood Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me directly. I think that would be a good place to start. I would love to get to know you and to hear some of your feedback or answer some of your questions. My email is my name, Heath, Heath, at indyncc.org. That's indyncc.org. And now may be a good time to connect as Christmas is approaching, which I think is a great introduction or reintroduction into church life. But either way, I'd love to hear from you about anything and everything, so please reach out. Or if you'd prefer a less personal or direct route, you might check out our website. It's indyncc.org. Similar to my email, that's www.indyncc.org. And admittedly, it needs a makeover. But the information there is good and generally up to date, thanks to the hard work of our office admin. So if you're wanting to know more, please check it out. This podcast is recorded by me, Heath Jones, in my church office, but it's distributed all over the place on all of the apps, at least all of the ones that I'm aware of, where you can listen to a podcast, whether you're talking about iHeartRadio app or Spotify or your basic Apple player that comes with your phone or device. But if you'd like to learn more about the ones who produce this podcast and distribute it, the All Indiana Podcast Network, then you should check them out. And if you've listened to that before, then you'll know, if you've listened to us before, then you'll know that the All Indiana Podcast Network produces podcasts made by Hoosiers. That's that weird word Indiana residents call themselves. As I was saying, these podcasts are made by Hoosiers in Indiana and are often about topics of interest to those who live in the state, but not exclusively. So if you're out of state or live out of state and still find yourself perusing the All Indiana Podcast Network, I think you'll discover that there's something there for everyone, or most people at least. So I'd encourage you to check them out. You can do so by visiting www.wishtv.com/podcasts. That's wishtv.com/podcasts. And one last thing. If you're listening to this podcast, or if you're watching this recording on YouTube, please pause it for a moment, or perhaps when it's done playing, like, subscribe, or follow us. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow the channel. Different apps will use different words, but they all amount to nearly the same thing. If you follow or subscribe to our channel, you'll be given updates and told when new episodes are released. And also, if you like, or if you are watching this by way of YouTube, like our videos, you can leave a comment. And or you can do that for the podcast too, I suppose. But this is supposed to help the internet's algorithms to direct our content to more people, or so I've been told. So by liking or leaving a comment, you're supporting the Northwood Podcast, if only in a small way, or you might be giving us some useful feedback that we might apply and make this all better. But enough of that. Moving on. In a moment, we'll be reading and then reflecting on a Bible passage found in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. More on that in a minute. But first, if you've been with us for a while, you know that now is the time where we pause for some ads for our podcast audience. So if you're watching, please forgive us this short break. And we're back. And as I was saying, today we're going to be going over a passage in the Bible found in Mark chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. Mark 13, 24 through 37, and it reads, "But in those days, Following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard. Be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. Maybe you've grown used to it by now, or maybe it still catches you by surprise when you show up for worship on the first Sunday of Advent. You know, we're gearing up for Christmas, early December, the one where we light the candle of hope. The first of the 4 candles we'll light on the Advent wreath, building up to the 5th candle in the center, the Christ candle, signifying our help has come. But at the start, we light the candle of hope. And on that first Sunday, you will hear a passage read like the one you just heard. You may have thought that wasn't very Christmassy or in keeping with this season. And this passage, upon first blush, can seem like it has ominous overtones. And I think that it does. And I'm sure I've shared this before, but when I was a child, I was terrified of passages like these. I can remember one time in particular when after a nightly Bible study, which was a nightly routine in my family's house growing up, well, after one of those, my father read a similar apocalyptic passage from the Gospel of Matthew. And that night I went to bed with my Bible clutched close to my chest in terrible fear. I cried tears of fear and prayed to God that Jesus wouldn't return in my lifetime. All of these words about sun darkening and violent upheavals, the sky falling, well, they terrified me. And most people are, I think, afraid of what's commonly known as the apocalypse. And by that, I mean the end of the world. At least for a moment, because that's what most people think of when they hear the word apocalypse. But today, I want you to know that this is a huge mistake, our understanding of it as the end of the world, and a misunderstanding of what this word apocalypse means. Because the word apocalypse does not mean, maybe a surprise to you, end of the world. Not in the original Greek. It's a Greek word. It comes from the Greek. And it doesn't even, in fact, imply anything violent. In fact, if you want a better translation, just look in the back of your Bibles to the book of Revelation. What you may not know is that word revelation is a literal translation of the word apocalypse. And it means just that, the word apocalypse, a revealing, an uncovering, or a disclosure of something. Not the end of the world, just a revelation. We've been studying the book of Revelation in our midweek Bible class, and one thing we've had to remember is that near and around the time of Jesus, give or take 2 centuries, apocalypse was a popular genre of literature. You could find other writings that would read similar to what you just heard. And these were writings addressed to people in hard times to give word and image to their experiences, but to also call them to a radical hope, a point that is often lost. More on that later. And that last thing is key. What I just said, apocalyptic literature was meant to call the people out of despair and into hope. So what is disclosed in Jewish and Christian apocalyptic literature is the nature of evil in our world, but only to clear the way to disclose or reveal a message of hope, a message that tells us that God has promised to bring an end to sin and suffering, and then to lead us to, well, what? A promised land? Heaven? Whatever word you use for it, when the prophets wrote of such a place and of such times, they envisioned a new heavens and a new earth. Don't miss it. New earth. And yes, by earth, we're talking about our very own planet, which we call home. And in this time and place, when the realm of God comes, justice will finally be realized, and those who do evil will turn from their ways, and those who have suffered long will find relief. That is the dream in broad terms, and that is what is disclosed in most Christian and Jewish apocalyptic writings, again in very broad terms. But also what is described in those writings is a speculative imagining of the transition between the old evil ages and the newness that God brings. The ancient prophets who wrote such literature believed that these transitions from the old to the new would be calamitous times of great upheaval because, despotic kings, who are a large part of the problem, or were back then, will not relinquish their crowns readily, for humanity's evil ways are so baked into our daily existence that to remove it will take a complete and total transformation, and it was believed that much of what is broken in our world will resist. Even nature itself was imagined to resist this process of transformation. So we have in colorful language, meant to convey the scale, scope, and intensity of such times, a poetic rendition or description of what it might feel like to go through such a transition. For these times can truly feel as though the sky were falling. Or to quote Jesus, who was in fact quoting the prophet Isaiah, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. So this is top-down change from the cosmos on down. And this is the way things can seem during times of cataclysmic change. Don't they say that it gets worse before it gets better? That's maybe something like the idea here. And the build-up to these verses, where we began today, is no better. Just before the passages we read, Jesus' disciples had been told that they would suffer persecution for their faith. And this should have come as no surprise in the wake of their friend John the Baptist's execution, who was also Jesus' cousin and also a prophet. But more of this thing would surely come, persecutions and hard times. And Jesus knew this. I said that the build-up to these verses was no better than what we find in the opening verses we read, because it describes violence and confusion all around. And I think one could make the case that the original hearers of Jesus' message could point even further back, past Jesus' sermon that we just read a part of, into a long history of a people suffering. The prophets would often cry out in their psalms and in their writings, "How long, Lord? How long?" Repeat it. Emphasis. That's the way Isaiah put it in Isaiah 6:11. And you can sometimes sense the desperation in these words. And lately, I've been feeling them myself internally. How long? How long until God's realm comes in full? Or until the dream of Christmas is stretched out throughout the rest of the calendar year? Or maybe that seems like too big an ask from your vantage point. Maybe the best you can hope for is a little break from the madness of our world, but even that would be quite a lot. Jesus' apocalyptic message, the word of God he wants to disclose to his disciples in this passage, is that even in this moment of calamity and confusion and violence, their help is on the way. Therein lies the hope. Jesus understands that before the oppressive grip the Roman Empire held on Israel was loosened, then removed, things were going to heat up. Rome wasn't going to take things lying down, and the collective heart of humanity, bigger than Rome, make it global. Well, the collective heart of humanity seems hard to change all at once. So the way forward will be hard, and Jesus knows this, and he knows that in that resistance, suffering must necessarily be endured before we can find peace. At least this is what the prophets thought, and that includes Jesus. So he described the dark times that were brewing on the horizon using the bombastic language prophets had used for centuries. The sky falling kind of talk. The language does not describe literally what will happen, but rather describes in vivid word pictures that are meant to convey a sense of calamity, what the future hard times may bring. And Jesus is worried in that confusion that his disciples may be sorely tempted in the struggle to lose heart, lose faith, and to give up the fight. But what Jesus knows and what he wants us to know is that the chaos of such times could be the death throes of an old order dying while a new order is in ascendance. And the new order Jesus brings is God's realm, or the kingdom of heaven, as he said sometimes, the kingdom of God, God's realm where humanity may finally live into its high calling, where peace may win out, where violence and suffering may end. But those who perpetrate violence in the current times, old age, will not go down without making some noise. And this is exactly what happened to Jesus. What you just heard him say to his disciples would very quickly soon happen. Very nearly after Jesus warned his disciples that things would get worse before they got better, they got very worse. He was arrested, and then he was killed. And the night was reported to have literally come and have arrived in midday. The sky turned to black. The sun blotted out around noon. The earth shook, as is recorded. All that Jesus and the prophets had foretold in terms of pending calamity, literally surrounding Jesus and his friends as he was killed. Is this the end? The disciples thought so. And even if the darkness had not enveloped them or the earth had not shaken, I'm sure that all would have seemed hopeless either way. The future dark forever, even without those theatrics. This is often how it feels to lose a friend unexpectedly, much less Jesus, because the disciples believed he was the Messiah, the one who would usher in a new era of life and vitality for Israel and for the human race, for them and their families included. But now that hope has died in the form of Jesus' limp body, what would you do? Run away? Hide? Like the disciples did? Who could blame you? In anticipation of these events and these responses after these hard times, Jesus told two short parables. He first tells us of a fig tree, a metaphor for the changing times that Jesus and some earlier prophets had used even for centuries to help suffering people better understand their circumstance. And here Jesus says that just as we know summer is near when a fig tree sprouts leaves, I suppose you could use any tree that sprouts leaves in the springtime to make the same point, but as soon as you see those leaves, you know that summer is near. And in a similar way, we know that God's help is near in the midst of our darkest hours. Like the darkest hours are the sign of life in a twisted way. In another passage, Jesus likens these times to the birth pangs that a woman feels before the joy that will come when her child arrives in the world. Could it be that the violence and the confusion that overwhelm us in these times are the birth pangs before new life finds us? These are the questions Jesus wants us to consider and then lean into hopefully. Jesus wanted his disciples to see things in this way, and they would see it play out. The darkness did come, the thunder, the confusion, Jesus dead. But then Easter. New life for Jesus and new life for the disciples. They would discover themselves to be the church, the body of Jesus, the hands and feet that did the work and the mouth that spread the good news. And in those early days, they saw amazing things. They saw the hungry fed in ways that I have never seen, and the poor housed in ways that I've never seen, even here in the richest nation that has ever existed, so they tell me. Back then they saw, as it is recorded, reconciliation between some of their oppressors and the oppressed. They were gifted a moment in time when things were different, where the gospel of Jesus had really taken hold and the community ordered itself in light of this. At least we're told. Maybe this is what Jesus meant when he told his disciples that that generation would not pass away before they saw these things. In a way, they did. But many generations since then have endured similar cycles of hopeless times that broke into better times. And what Jesus brings is better than better times. What he brings is the cure for the human heart and a better perspective for us to have. He brings us peace if we can listen and do what he says. He brings us joy and love. Jesus' arrival in our lives marks the end of our old ways and a breaking into of the new. So if you are overwhelmed by these times, and if the ways of our world have caused you to lose hope, look to this metaphor of the fig tree, or rather look to the signs of the times. There's a lot wrong with this world, but they cannot remain this way forever. Spring is on the way. Summer will soon follow. So hold on. Wait and wait hopefully. If the apocalypse is meant to reveal to us that good times are on the horizon, then bring it on. Apocalypse now is what I say. And please, God, would you hurry? Which leads me to the short parable Jesus told at the end of this apocalyptic sermon, the second one about the homeowner who leaves his, we'll call them employees, in charge of his house while he was away. And in that parable, Jesus emphasizes the importance of these employees remaining ever ready for the return of the homeowner. Keep the house ready. Keep the fire going. Keep the roof mended. Keep the floor clean. Keep the refrigerator stocked. Because they don't know when the homeowner will return. So in every moment, they are told they should live in expectation of the homeowner's return. And for the life of us all, please don't fall asleep on the job, is the point. This parable is for us Christians in any age we Christians, in any age who have grown impatient with the ways of the world or perhaps have given up any hope that things can change. When this happens, people grow complacent and they give up. People in churches grow complacent. We might notice many problems going on that we might address, but then think to ourselves, what's the point? The world is too big and its problems too complex. I guess I'll just wait and perhaps pray until this whole thing is over. It's kind of an idea you've got your ticket to heaven and you're waiting it out. Or falling asleep. Jesus says stay awake, stay alive. He wants us to stay engaged in God's work, even in hard times, so that we will not miss God's realm when it comes. Meaning sometimes we can grow so complacent because of all that's wrong with our world that we miss the possibilities for life that may exist right in our midst. Or to reference the parable again, we are to continue to try and keep this house in order the best that we can. We don't want to grow apathetic, despondent, or, hopeless. We fight hopelessness by clinging to hope for all we've got. We stay awake and fight the darkness until, we don't know how long. And Jesus even said no one on earth knows the day or the hour when the good news will finally be realized and we will see it and be free. But God will liberate. As we progress towards that time that we have waited for, we must keep up the good fight. So my church, Northwood Christian Church, these are trying times. The earth seems to groan and cough, sputter and spit, and occasionally throw up as it tries to compensate for the effects of the environmental devastation we've wrought on planet Earth. Jesus warned of wars and rumors of wars in the final moments before God's transformative work. Again, birth pangs. Birth pangs in every age, it would seem. Jesus wants us to think of these as birth pangs with the expectation that new life is just around the corner as we approach it. So in this first week of Advent, as we light a candle of hope, here is an invitation to light a candle of hope in your own heart. To recommit to the restorative and redemptive work we signed up for when we became followers of Jesus Christ. if these calamities of the world are a sign that summer is on the way rather than more and more winter, then I've got to think that now is the most important time for us to hold fast to hope, to keep hope alive, and don't lose out on what joy you may find in the meantime. So instead of circling our wagons or falling asleep on the job, let's remain awake. Let's keep our eyes wide open and search for signs of God's movement. And when you see it, dive in. Dive into whatever redemptive work God calls you to in the face of and in defiance of these hard times. Work hard to undo and redirect the destructive ways of humanity, even when it seems like there is no hope for the human race. For we Christians believe that there is hope and that we are part of the answer. Together, not as individuals. We are not that full of hubris, I hope. And Jesus used apocalyptic imagery and parables to instill a hope in us that our help will come. Christmas time should have the same effect on us, for Christmas itself sends us an apocalyptic message of sorts. Christmas reveals to us that even in the midst of a long winter, we can still find hope. That even when the forces of empire and exploitation have us careening toward our own demise, that even in that context, a baby may still be born. New life and consequent joy. And that baby would grow for us to find that he had many, if not most, of the answers we seek. And even now we wait for this one, Jesus Christ, to finish the work that God started way back when. And Christmas interrupts our lives each and every year to remind us that not all is darkness and that love will win out in the end. And I hope this gives you hope. Each year, hope seems to find me around this time in new and profound ways. Perhaps this year, you will find it to be the same for you. In the meantime, here is my own apocalypse. My own unveiling of what I hope to be true. I hope that these times are, in fact, the storm before the calm. I hope that the sunrise is just on the horizon and that humanity will see a new dawn, an era when the will and ways of God are actualized. I live in expectation of these times because I believe in the hopeful future Jesus revealed in his own apocalypse. But if you need an infusion of hope, I think you may have come to the right place. Perhaps we may all see together what happens next with the planet Earth and the rest of our human race. And it will be great for us to be together, supporting one another, going through whatever we must go through. But in the meantime, we invite you to join with those of us at Northwood who have continually and faithfully committed to the waking life, to the life that will face and fight the darkness and keep the house ready. We are determined to not be caught asleep in our world, trying to not be caught asleep in our world, even as these times call us to apathy. We will keep hope alive and continue to live in that expectation that God's realm is on the way. Like the employees in the parable, we'll keep up this house as best as we can until we can't. We'll continue to advocate for justice, plead the case of the poor, and stand as advocates for peace, sometimes even putting our own bodies on the line for the cause. For good times are coming, when Jesus says peacemakers will be called children of God, finally, and the poor called blessed at last. And Jesus doesn't want us to miss any of this, lost in darkness as we've been. So one last time, wake up if you're dreaming, and hold even faster to hope.